Okay, and welcome. Hopefully you can all hear me correctly, that you can see the screen, all that sort of fun stuff. We'll be answering questions as we go along, so feel free to pop them up. I've got them on the screen there. And welcome. So this is Charles Sturt University IT Masters CISSP study session. This is our first week, and we're going to go through all the different bits and pieces you need to learn and give you a mind map and all the rest so that you can get through everything you need to get CISSP certified within a short period of time. It's not actually as hard as many people think, and it is, unlike some people who complain about it, a very good certification to have for many reasons. Now, I'm not going to give you all the breakdown and details at the moment about what you need to actually do the exam and everything like that. We will do that before the end. All right, so should be showing screen. I'm not sure why. Can people type in whether they're getting video or whatever or correctly? Just a couple. I've got some people saying no video there, so if you can... All right, so we have some people. Either way, it's being recorded. So it's still just the start screen. I haven't moved on, so don't worry about that yet. Okay, screen 2. Now, Certified Information Security Professional. All right, so we're going to do this without doing the breaking your wallet bit and all the rest and get you through. So these are our webinars. We've had to split them. There's too many of you. Too many people here want to get trained and learn and all the rest, which is great. The more people, the better. This is all about trying to get education to the masses and all the rest. And let's get going. So this is a compressed version of a subject, ITE 514, Professional System Security, part of the Masters of Information System Security. And one of the things I'm going to be doing is trying to hand over to some of the other people on here, and I'm not quite sure how well this is going to go, if I can find them. And are you there?
I'm unmuted, Craig, so thank you for that. I might just get you to move the slides forward. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
That's great. Look, thanks, Craig, and I will be brief. Everyone, my name is Jason Houth. I'm a course director here at Charles Sturt University, and I'm responsible for the management of master's courses, IT master's courses here at Charles Sturt. So I did want to speak just very briefly about these for those who are interested. So CSU and IT Masters have been in partnership now for around about 10 years, and we do specialise in offering very industry-focused master's degrees in both IT and management by distance education. So the Master of Information System Security, which you can see on screen now, is one of these degrees. I won't go through it in depth. Key features are that our master's programs are 12 subjects long. They are distance education programs, so they are meant to be studied part-time by distance education, and they contain a mix of typical academic style subjects, which are more theoretical in nature, and industry-based subjects which are based on industry content such as the CISSP. The good thing about this is that these courses therefore are very relevant to people who are working in the industry. Not only that, you can get credit, a number of credits for subjects in the course based on certifications that you've acquired. Okay, so CSU is a leader in distance education. You can see there's some of the numbers when we compare against other universities. So distance education is our main focus. We're the market leaders in that area. I should also mention quickly that for those of you who are in industry but don't have an undergraduate degree, we do offer pathways into our master's program. So please get in touch with us if you want to know some more information, if you want to inquire about how many credits you might get into the program, and if indeed you're eligible. So I think one more slide, Craig, dealing with the fact that we're market leaders in the particular sector that we're dealing with, which is IT postgraduate, in other words, master's programs, domestic. You can see some of the numbers there compared with other Australian universities. We're a fair way ahead of the pack in terms of market leadership. We have been that way for a number of years. So look, I won't take any more of your time. I know you're keen to get started with the CISSP, but please, we do have a number of these degrees that are very industry focused. Please contact us if you want to learn more, and don't forget you can get credit for these programs based on industry certifications. So thank you, Craig, for the time, and I'll hand back to you.
Okay, I am Dr. Craig Wright from Charles Sturt University. We're going to be taking you through. The slides will be up on the MOOC, so anyone who's logged into the learning portal and had a look in there, you'll find slides, and over the next few days I will be pointing you to many areas in reading. Now, these courses will be available and we will be doing more, and let us get started. So, first of all, certification. This is well, one of the more common security certifications out there. There are many requirements to the CISSP. We're not going to go into those here because you can read them on ISC² site. What it does offer is a common body of knowledge, and what we're going to do is take you through study suggestions and what you can review, and well, at the end of the day, learn how we can go into becoming a CISSP. So there will be links to all the classes, so hopefully all these things will get put up by Chantel and others who are madly answering questions in the background, and we'll go from there. So let's go into this class. First, I want to thank all the different authors and materials and whatever else that I've got stuff from. Not all of this is from me. Some is from ISC², where I happen to be an author, but I'm only one of many. Some is from CCQ or CCQR, others from other people out there, and many people have made things available on the internet, everything from Wiki on, and that's going to enable us basically to learn without having to pay much money. So this series of lectures, we're going to use a whole lot of free and open source materials, and I'm going to be putting those out on the MOOC. So questions about registration on the exam will be posting later, and going into all of this so that you can, well, sit the exam yourself. All right. CISSP, ISC², it's ANSI ISO accredited. It basically covers a domain body of knowledge that you can learn from. So we're going to cover all of the different areas for you to learn this. So like every other certification program, it has a basic level of knowledge, recertification after a certain amount of time, you have to do CPE hours, and you have to keep learning. One of the key aspects of all this is you get to pay and learn again, and show that you've done a minimum amount of learning opportunities. It's a professional certification with a body of knowledge, NDA, all of the rest, and allows you to put a few letters after your name, and requires commitment to a code of ethics, so all the normal bits and pieces. There are the requirements. You have a nice long exam, 6 hours, etc., and certification, we'll go into that on the forums later, so I'm not going to go into all the bits there, but if you have a look at isc².org, then all of that will be there. So one of the first things I get you to do is have a look at the site, www.isc2.org. You will find out everything you need. They're not affiliated with us and whatever else. We're just training for this certification. So set up your own account and go from there. The domains, we're going to cover 2 of them this week: access control and software development security. Access control are those mechanisms that work together to help you, well, basically protect your system from unauthorized or unwanted access. So it goes into how you can set your system up to control where people get to, and well, at the other end of it, software development security is how you create software that can withstand attack. So both of those are important aspects, and they're the 2 we're going to cover. Now, when you're preparing for the exam, make sure that you have some time set aside to study beforehand. This is going to be really packed in, and there's a lot here that we're talking about in a short time, but at the same time, what we want to make sure that you can do is do as much as you can to get through as quickly. Now, collect your study materials. I'll be pointing out many things, and what you should do is collect all of these together so that you can keep studying. We're going to go through some of that, and on top of that, help you with practice tests, etc. There are many of these online, and what we'll be pointing out are some of the good free online sites so that you can go out there and practice as you're learning. Once you've done the exam, there are other things you need to do. As I said, we'll take that more up on the forum, but you need to learn 10 domains well and have a good knowledge. So please feel free to put questions in as we're going. People will be typing away and hopefully get some answers in there. Okay, so people have been asking questions away, and we will be going over some of these. Now, a couple of things like cyber law, they are applicable in other countries as well. There are a lot of areas that are going to be covered in more or less detail and things like cyber law, but the main difference is, well, how in depth it's going to be. If you're talking about something like the US or Australian law, they're covered fairly well, whereas other ones in more or less detail. All right, so everything here we're going to cover in security principles. Now, this degree, this certification is far more comprehensive than some of the other ones like Security Plus. It covers the basics, and it is the fundamentals of security. It's not hands-on. It's the old mile-wide, inch-deep part of it. So 3 things you need to basically do to create security: availability, integrity, and confidentiality. And I'll say that in that order. And there's an important reason why I've said it in that order, because we're not in the military for the most part, then confidentiality is not the most important part of what we're doing. Availability is critical. If you take Amazon or or Facebook or whatever else, then being able to get on there and use the site is critical. Okay, so very important to have the ability to get onto the site and do things. Now, in this course, I've already put up a mind map. This is part of what we're going to be going through. Today's section will be looking at access controls and also software development security. If you have a look through this document in the MOOC already, it's downloaded there, we put it together for you, you will see each of the domains covered with all the different aspects that you need to know. So this is a nice long document already that we put together for you to have a look through, and we're going to point you to areas you can learn and what you need, and if there's any tools or anything like that. So domain 1, looking at all of this with what we have for each domain, goes into subtopics, classification, etc., policy, etc., and what you basically need to learn. What is a MOOC? A MOOC is a massive online course. So the learning site, the learning.it area that hopefully Chantel will put up and link to again, is, well, going to give you forums and areas to ask questions and other such things so that we can answer it much better than all of this here, where all the slides and PDFs and everything will be loaded after this question. So availability, integrity, and confidentiality are the security areas we're going to do, and we're going to start with 2 parts. Part 1, access controls. These are the mechanisms that help make a secure architecture and create an information system. We need to understand concepts, methodologies, and different attacks. Okay, so first bit, Wikipedia, access control. It is a good read, and we're going to point out some of these things as we go. So information system security, we need many things. We need the humans, the people, not only the people, but the systems and policies, technologies, and all the rest to get things working. So information security is all about taking people and working with them to ensure that the infrastructure that they need to maintain, manage, and run can be managed and run. And that's something people don't always think about. At the end of the day, if we can't maintain the people in our organization, then we're going to fail. It's that simple. So it's really going to be something where we need to be able to maintain and manage all the people in our organizations. To do that, we have control combinations. So if we look at the thing grabbed from the NSA here. We're going to look at things like preventative soft, preventative technical, detective, and all the rest. And we need to understand each of these types of, well, control combinations. So preventative means we stop something from happening in the first place. Detective, after it occurs, we can come in there and fix the problem and rectify it. Now, we have to remember that no system is ever going to be perfectly secure. This is the first thing we need to understand. If we don't get around that, we're going to fail automatically, because preventative, well, that's great, but it's like anything else in the real world. We can put a gate up, but someone will eventually get past it. On the same time, detective means, well, we've found out what has happened, and then we can go into things like corrective controls and fix them after the event. So we have to have a combination of controls, and when we're talking about things like preventative controls, we have everything like soft controls, like administrative, the policy controls, employment checks, and all of the rest, right up to the technical and physical controls that may stop people getting in. So these will also be needed. Detective are the things that help us find where preventative controls have failed. So looking at the candidate bulletin, and this is scrolling forward for some reason. Access control is collection of mechanisms that permits managers in a system to exercise directly or constraining influence over behavior, use, etc. You need to understand these concepts and be able to go through what it has, and this is jumping forward for some reason, but anyway. So access controls, all those detective abilities, whatever else, need to allow us to find any vulnerabilities and exposures on our system. We need to be able to look at the exposures and treat them from a risk perspective. This is one of the key aspects of this that we need to understand. Risk matters. Risk means that we take potential cost. We look at the likelihood of someone breaking into our system and then determine how much we should be protecting it based on that. No person is going at any time to have everything protected. It's just not possible. If you think about your house, for instance, not many people have bulletproof lucite on their windows. Not many people have ironclad doors. Unless you're a drug dealer and you're worried about these things, you don't generally have a 16-foot concrete wall with razor wire around your house. In some areas people might, but it's always about risk. So what we need when we're thinking about access controls is to put these different, well, systems in place in such a way that we can manage the risk that we're going to face, that we can manage what occurs. So we need management to be able to know what risk they're going to face, and that will allow them, well, to take everything together and still make profit, because this is another point that we need to understand. If we're not profitable, there's no reason for doing things. So access controls, what we're doing it. These are how users and systems communicate and interact with one another. Access itself is the flow of information between subject and object, and subject is the active entity requesting access to an object or the data or object, where the object is a passive entity. So these are some of the terms you need to know if you're going to get through the session. Now, the subject, that's the person, and in this world of internet connected everywhere, then we're looking at also machines now. So in an internet of things, we're looking at SCADA machines, we're looking at little monitoring devices, whatever else, sometimes botnet computers. But objects, that's the passive entity, the database, the website, the whatever else we're getting to. And access is how we control the flow of information. To do this, we need to understand identification, authentication, and authorization, and their distinct functions, all of which together create identity management. It's the broad term where we have all these different protocols to identify, authenticate, and authorize users. And we're going to cover each of those. So identification, first we need to know who is our user. that is something like a username, other public information. That's how we get basically up there. So our username is first of all. So how do we get usernames? Well, we can just set those. One username, one person. It's some way of identifying an individual. One of the big problems we find is where we have guest usernames and we have multiple people all using the same, which is a bad no-no type scenario. What we really need to do is make sure that every subject, user, program or process is independently identified. Then once we have a user, we can identify them properly and authenticate them by proving their identity. So this is something you have, something you do, or something you basically are. So biometrics, passwords, passphrases, tokens, and other information, where what we should be doing is strong authentication, where we have multiple different areas. Okay, so strong authentication is important, and we'll cover that as well. Biometrics is one way of doing that, which is the most expensive, quite often very difficult to get in place, and it can also put users off. It's something that the user is. So biometrics, things like fingerprint scanners, are something that the user does. And yes, I drink far too much coffee. I see that one, but that's not a problem. I'm excited about security, excited about teaching, and we'll keep going with that. So some of the most common systems, things you should read up on: fingerprint, palm scan, iris scan, all the rest. Had a friend of mine once did a DSD presentation and made a real stuff up. He was talking about retinal scanning and got that one wrong and had rectal scanning. Strangely enough, that one didn't go down terribly well. No one in the DSD wanted to bend over to prove who they were. But biometric systems, like everything else, have comparisons where we look at the crossover error rate. This is the one that we need to look at in comparison. Lots of people talk about type 1 errors, type 2 errors, and forget the crossover error rate is the real issue here. That is the combination of the two, because you can move generally between type 1 or type 2 error, which I'll explain in a second, but the crossover error rate is fairly much set for the device. So you buy a better device, you get a lower crossover error rate. Type 1 error is a false rejection rate. This is the one that annoys people. You try and put your thumb on there, and I used to wait a farm, so I got lots of scars on my fingers, and the machine goes, get lost. And you put it back again, and it goes, get lost. And you spend half an hour trying to log in. Type 2 error rate is the bad one. That's one we don't want. It's a false acceptance rate. That's where someone comes in and says they're Craig Wright when they're not me. That sort of thing. So type 1 and type 2 can be moved. We can lower the type 1 error and make more people get on quicker, but then we have more people get on who shouldn't be on our system. So we have a switch between those two. We have passwords. This is username password combination that everyone should know. It's a weak security mechanism. And we should really be looking at strong password protections. With clipping levels and things like this where we cut things short, then we have some big problems, because it can be difficult to really know who we're talking about. Techniques are there to monitor this if we don't encrypt the connections between our machines, and there'll be lots of reading. Don't worry, I'm going to run through all of this quite quickly, but each of these areas that we're mind mapping, we're talking about, there is reading on. So there is at least a paragraph that's going to be loaded on all of these for you to have a bit of a read over the next week. So one thing you need to know is a password checker and a password cracker, and you need to know the difference. Password checkers are those things where you go in and check the strength of your password as you're putting it into a website. You should have a good, strong password. At the same time, password crackers are ones that try and break it. Password passphrase, well, we're looking at the typical sequence of characters, and what we're trying to do there is make something a bit longer. If we'd really done this in the right way in the first place, a passphrase would have been used instead of a password. We should never have a password. Passphrase, where we can make a nice, simple, easy to remember sentence, is always more secure than a 8 or 12 character, squiggly character, upper, lower, all the rest password. And it's easier. As humans, heuristics to remember something like my password is my protection is far simpler to remember than squiggly character hash hash open bracket capital HG. So passphrases are a little bit longer and they are more complex because of that. One-time passwords or dynamic passwords are another way of doing this. There are many right from single pieces of paper that give you everything to things like RSA, soft tokens and other such things. And what they're doing is a one-time authentication scheme. So they can be generated by tokens or hardware or other such things. And it's something you have that then calculates a password that is used once. There are two types of token devices, and after you look through the online site and have a bit of a read with a whole lot of material I'll be pumping up there tomorrow at the latest, there will be stuff to read up all the different types out there so you can get to know what they are. There are synchronous ones, time-based or counter-synchronization, such as the RSA, and asynchronous ones, such as some of the calculators that you put information into. And you'll need to read up and know the different types of devices if you're going to be successful in this. And then we also have smart cards. Everyone should be familiar with smart cards these days, because if you look at those little things on the end of your Visa for PayPass and all the rest, they're in fact a type of smart card, not just a memory card. Memory card being the older type where it just holds information but doesn't do any processing, and a smart card both holds and processes it. So it has contact, contactless and all the rest, but does a calculation. So you can't just do a simple snapshot and steal all the info. There are attacks against smart cards, but these generally require that you actually have the smart card, or at least have access to it or some way to read it as you're going. Attacks on smart cards are difficult for that reason, and as long as you can get your users to understand that if they lose their card, they should tell you about it, it's not too bad. So, hashing and encryption. We're going to cover this in far more detail in the crypto module. That's one of the days we're doing, so I won't go into too much now, but a hash is a one-way function. That means you mathematically do it one way and you can never get anything back. It allows you to create a way of taking something like a password and turning it into a munged up thing using mathematics so that you don't have clear text and you can send data over the wire. So it gives you extra security, especially if you put that with a salt being an extra little bit of data that you can chuck together. So we're going to give you some reading on CISSP and also salts and random variables. So there's lots of reading to go into all through this course. So in the crypto module, we'll cover things like PGP, but not so much technically, but the basics of how public-private keys work and also how hashes and other such things work. So authentication, we have cryptographic keys such as digital signatures to prove identity, which is where you hold a private key. Digital signature signs information that's out there. And one thing to, well, understand is the difference between a digital signature and a digitized. So digital is, well, if you're talking about digital signature, this is where we're talking about the signed keys. Digitized, that's where someone just scans your signature. So next we get to authorization. Once we have authenticated and we're on the system, this is how we can then prove identity and use it. So once we have, I am Craig Wright, I have proven who I am, what am I allowed access to? Just because I have proven I'm Craig Wright doesn't mean I'm allowed access to everything. That's the next bit. So in doing this, we need to know that we have access rights to certain things, and this is what authorization allows us. So we have different ways of doing that. We can have roles, groups, location, time, or transaction types. So typical group type format where we can put different usernames into a group and allow those access to a file. Location being physical location. If you're coming from the head office or this branch office, then you're allowed to get to something. Time, you can do it in business hours but not outside. Transaction types, you're allowed to do a transaction in your bank account for say $2,000, but over that you need to have a second person come in also add authentication to it. So roles, these are something like, well, if we take a bank teller or someone entering data, a manager or something like that. It's something that we're going to do. Now, in remembering how to do this, authorization also has other problems. We have authorization creep. Well, what's that mean? Well, anyone who's been with an organization for a few years and moved through different departments will quite often notice then they gain more and more over time. They have more and more access rights. Many organizations forget to take things away, which is default to 0. You remove all the privileges and you wipe someone out and reset them up. Authorization creeps because that doesn't happen, where people start in one department, get moved sideways laterally to another, get promoted, move sideways, and by the end of the day, they're basically a super administrator over all the different systems because no one has decided to take any of their privileges away. So that's why we need to think about need to know. What do people actually need to do in the organization? And to do that, we set up things like access control lists and other things which we'll also have you go into. So, problems. We have many different users within our organization. Different levels of access are going to be needed, different authentication, different resources are going to be there, all of which we have to think about how we get into and how we access. Resources may be classified differently for different people. Diverse identity data. We might have people in our organization, people outside of it, all needs to be taken into account. And the worst part of it, anyone who's been in a large corporation especially is going to know that things move every time we get different people involved. So CIO comes in, he centralizes. 3 years later, new CIO, decentralize, etc., etc., etc. So what do? One thing, we can maybe put enterprise-wide authorization, single sign-on and other things. Difficulties here come from user provisioning, password synchronization, making sure that everything's there and easily accessible, allowing users to self-service, and allowing auditing, reporting, workflow management, and mostly for many organizations, compliance. For instance, if we're talking about Australian banks and other such things, we have APRA. US ones have their own things, like in US health organizations, they've got HIPAA to tend with. So regulatory compliance is another one. Government making sure that we do things to certain standards. So to do this, we need to think about how we're going to manage and maintain. And single sign-on has good and bad aspects to it, because if you have a single user accessing everything in the organization, if you don't set it up correctly, loss of that one account can lose everything in your network. So you need to make sure that they are set up well. If you don't, then you're going to have some big problems. And single sign-on, there are technologies, Kerberos, both the Linux version, the open one, and Windows, where Windows, of course, is going to have many differences between the open ones. Sesame, security domains, dumb terminals, all of which allow you to sign back in. When we're doing this, we also need to understand the access control models that are out there. And there are three main ones. So there are some academic ones based on these blah and whatever else that we'll also have you read up on. The reality is you don't use them so much in real life, but you need to know them for the exam. Discretionary, mandatory, and non-discretionary and role-based are the three primary types. Discretionary, this is the system that most business groups will actually do. So system uses discretionary access, allows you to decide what you're going to do out there in a decentralized manner. So the way this works is the business owner, say the salesperson, will own access to the sales database. So the sales manager then sets what privileges you have for each of the salespeople, etc. That doesn't mean they implement them. It means that they set them. So access control is the discretion of the owner. So the owner of the resource is going to be the one who sets control in a discretionary system. Mandatory is more of a military or government system. This is where we have labeling systems, top secret, secret, confidential, all those sort of things that we've seen plenty of times around. And we label files, and users have security clearances, and resources are accessed by security labels. Non-discretionary controls at the same time. So we have role-based access control. Role-based, RBAC, uses a centrally administered set of controls to determine how those subjects and objects interact. With group policy, even though it's a group-based thing, you can actually set up role-based access control. And basically, if you do this correct, then you'll have a really robust security infrastructure. How you do that is quite difficult. And many organizations don't spend the time understanding their own organization. So what you need to do, first of all, is get people to talk. So it comes back to understanding what you need within the organization. This is one of the big parts. It's not the security people out there who set what security is. The security is in conjunction with all those other managers, all those other people who own the objects, and together these people set the privileges. The security boffin here is that person who makes sure that this is in place on what the owner has told them. So there are many different technologies that support these things, and rule-based access control being one of them that we'll have to read up on. But we have things like constrained user interfaces. Web interfaces are one, so maybe the database isn't fully locked down, but you can only get to certain things through certain AJAX controls. Access control matrices, which we'll cover a little bit later. And then we also need to understand the difference between content and context-dependent access control. First being on what you're accessing, and then what context you're accessing it in. So, rule-based access control. This is where we need to understand specific rules between our subject and an object. So Windows group policy, for instance, we can set up our groups, we can set up our users, we can set up the objects, which can be a computer server, a file, whatever else, and then how we access it, when we're allowed to access it, all the rest. So rule-based access is generally used in mandatory access control systems, but it can also be done in discretionary if we do it well. That's where we've got to sit down with the people in our organization and not just say that security owns security. We don't. Owner, the person who owns something, is not the person who puts the security controls in place. Okay, so next, constrained user interfaces. Anyone who's been around forever and a day like myself will remember old menu-based systems where you had a Linux terminal or a VMS terminal, showing my age here, talking about PDP 8s and 11s that we used to access. And back when I worked at the Australian Stock Exchange, for instance, we would have, well, limited terminals that you could only get to certain things from. One of the security controls, of course, was if you could break out of that terminal, then, well, we could get right back to shells and do other things we weren't meant to do. So the types of access controls that we generally have in place are menus, database views, constrained interfaces, and shells. So, access control matrices. This is a table, subject and object, telling you what you can and can't do. Two types, capability table, where we bind things to a subject, and access control list, which most of you should have heard about if you've heard about router controls or anything like this, where it's bound to an object. So access control list on routers are generally doing things like IP address controls. So content dependent. Access is dependent on the content within the object. So if a file contains certain information, then that's what we'll do. So if we've got a database and we've got a particular type of info in there, such as PCI information, payment card industry, Visa cards, all of that, then maybe we have access control rules. Context is where we're talking about collection of information that we're going to get and the decisions based on what might be done. So yes, I'm going fast in all of this because we only have a small amount of time and there's a lot of info here, but don't worry about that, because what we are going to do is publish a whole lot of reading for you to go over. So that you can go back over this after you've done some reading, and it will help you then understand some of what you've already learnt and consolidate all of that. I will also be loading up a whole lot of audio files for those who are like me and while you're on the train and other such things you like to listen to audio, I will have those several hours worth for each thing, and there will be much more on each of these topics for you to read on the internet as well. But back to it. So access control administration. So we need to first of all decide how we're going to manage things. So first, discretionary access control, mandatory or role-based. Once we've done that, then we look at whether we're going to do centralized versus decentralized, whatever else. So this is a strategic view taken from the organization. So strategically we can put all this together either as a centralized control where one entity or one group or central office or whatever else agrees how it's going to occur, or it can be decentralized. So when we're looking at centralized, we have things like radius, TACAX, and diameter. Radius and TACAX being out there for general download, part of Windows for radius, Linux and all the rest. And on top of that we have other things like group control, group policy control, etc. And yes, you can actually put these together. Now, yes, it's there are probably a couple spelling errors on the TACAX or whatever else, but that's fine. We'll get to that after. Spelling checker doesn't always do them correctly, and sometimes it mucks them up totally. But centralized access control is generally not ever going to really happen. Decentralized is not ever going to happen. Apart from the smallest of organizations, what we really have is a combination of centralized and decentralized. So we have some things in our head office and then other things that are out there managed at the edges, so to speak. And we have different categories of how we control these things. Physical, admin, technical. So administrative controls, telling people what they can and can't do. We have physical controls, everything from firewalls to separate networks or whatever else, and even things like VPNs and other such things. Administrative controls include policies and procedures, separation of duties, all of these things to make sure that we stay isolated. Physical controls, network segmentation, area separation, data backups, all the rest. Then we have logical, that's encryption protocols, auditing, making sure that we do things right. And auditing can even be an access control. If people know they're being watched, then they're not going to act in the same way. So New South Wales Police, one of the systems that was set up with COPS 2, for instance, auditing was enabled, and well, people were allowed access to everything, but if they went to something outside their division, they had to explain why. So, well, people would come knock on their door and ask them why are they going to those files they're not meant to get to, and if it was involved with what they were allowed to do within the police force, no problems. If not, then they probably found they weren't a cop anymore. So access control types, we have many different types. We want to prevent, detect, correct, deter, recover, and compensate. They're the access control functionalities we need to know. So preventative controls, which are stopping people in the first place, which are never perfect. That's why we need detective controls. So when things do get past all of this, then we can detect what's gone wrong and then get to the corrective phase where we fix it. We want to deter people from doing bad things, stop them from doing it, make it so that they don't want to. It's unlikely that they're going to get away with it. It's not that they're not going to make a profit, etc. Recover, fix our system, get rid of the viruses that we've picked up, all of that sort of fun stuff, and compensate, fix, and move on. So differences between preventative and deterrence. Preventative stops us from doing something, full stop. So preventing would be something like a firewall. Stops us from getting into the system. Deterrent could be something as simple as going out there and prosecuting. So an administrative control for deterrence could be we use forensics in this organization and we track down where people are going wrong and we hand them to the police. So that makes it less likely they want to get into our system. So we need to understand that there are preventative administrative, preventative physical, and preventative technical controls. Admin being hiring practices, policies, etc. Physical being something physical, and technical being things like passwords, encryption, antivirus software, all of that stuff there. Now, correct versus recover. Well, correcting is sort of that initial trying to fix it up, and recover is back to where we were, fully corrected, fully up and running again. Correct is, well, getting everything back in place quickly. And we'll cover some more of that when we talk about the incident response type areas of this course later. So accountability is part of what we need to do. And if people are being recorded, people know what's happening, there's an audit trail. If they do anything bad, then that's part of how we get to monitor what's going on in our systems. If people are being tracked, we can deter bad action, bad things happening, because we can then follow the audit trail and say, hey, you did something wrong. And using attack signatures, variance detection, audit, etc., we can look through our information and go back in time and go, hey, you committed fraud against my organization, I'm going to have to do something against you, that sort of thing. Accountability, we have other things, keystroke monitoring, can be good and bad. Bad guys also do this. I wouldn't recommend it. So there are privacy implications for monitoring keystrokes, and not generally a good thing, but we should know what it is. Scrubbing, removing incriminating evidence in audit logs is also a problem we need to look at. Not from an accountability, but a lack of accountability. If people can get to the audit trail, the logs, the whatever else that they have, then they're going to be able to remove information about what they've done. And this is part of what hackers do. So generally speaking, most organizations these days should not do keystroke monitoring, but some still do. And I would not recommend it. Legal and other things will be problematic. So other things, no access control, know how you can block things, control things, and all of the rest. And each of these little topics here is going to be a little bit of reading for you, so I won't go into it in any detail. Other things, unauthorized disclosure of information is a big one that we're looking at. What we're seeing out there in the world most of the time is not cyber war, it is cyber espionage. There is a big difference between the two. Unauthorized access, unauthorized disclosure is not about warfare, it's generally about breaking into a system and stealing info. So things that might happen are object reuse and data hiding, being able to get onto a system, and some of the other ways of taking that into really high security areas include white noise control, tempest control, and whatever else. Tempest being where you do everything right up until putting your cables into special conduits that if they're breached, you can tell. Having Faraday cages so that you're not losing any emanations about computers or anything like that. We also need to understand intrusion detection, which we have three components, sensors, analyzers, and the admin interface. And intrusion detection and prevention are different things. Detection is really a sniffer on steroids, where we get to point out certain things that are occurring on our network. Prevention then takes some of those things and actively blocks. But because of type 1 and type 2 errors that we mentioned earlier that you'll need to do some reading, more reading on, then prevention can never be as successful as detection unless you're going to block most of your organization. And a honeypot is something to attract and isolate users over time. So NIDs and HIDs are the two different types, network and host-based, and each broken into signature or statistical anomaly or rule-based types generally, looking at things like traffic protocols and rules that can be put there. Prevention systems have been called the next big thing for a long time. It's a preventative and proactive technology, whereas IDS is a detective technology. Network and host-based are the two types, where network monitors traffic going in and out of systems, has problems if there's encrypted traffic that it can't see, whereas host looks at everything going at the end host. In large organizations, it can be problematic because there are many, many hosts to monitor. Honeypots, trying to lure someone to things. They can be anything from a honey key in a database where we try and make a field that will attract people to waste time on it, to a fake system that seems to be vulnerable, and we try and capture people's time and effort in. And network sniffers, well, everything from network monitoring on. So, threats to access controls. Insiders, dictionary attacks, brute force attacks, spoofing, other such things. Insiders are still probably one of the biggest threats, and like it or not, they're always going to be a threat. The main reason being that they have access to our network already. Unlike those people out there on the internet, those insiders can do all that naughty stuff time and time again. Dictionary attacks, if we choose bad passwords, there's even Klingon dictionaries out there. There are ones in Star Trek words, all the sorts of things. So just because you think you're being a bit of a smartass and you're using Klingon words, doesn't really matter. Brute force means you try every combination. That's why we use speed bump passwords and give you 3 tries in a minute, then bump you out or something similar, or even spoofing log on, where we get to try that. So role-based access control, we're looking at user role resource. So the user has access to certain things and not everything. Role-based, what we do is we set up different ways of running through what we're doing, like help desk or maybe, as I said, bank teller or whatever else, and we give them access based on that. So we limit what people can and can't do. So we're not going to give them full open access to everything on our network. We want to limit them. Basically, when we're looking at RBAC, whether we're doing core or hierarchical, and once again, lots of reading for you here, what we're trying to do is find ways of creating the role in the organization, the job function, the structure, and together that allows us to limit what people can do to what they should be doing. So threats, things you need to read up and understand: dictionary attacks, sniffers, brute force, spoofing, phishing, and identity theft. So looking at this, what we're looking at, admin controls. These are security policy, personnel control, supervisory structure, and security awareness training. And I'll be giving you a number of how-tos on creating policy, creating personnel controls, and other such things. Physical controls, network segmentation. If you don't connect a machine to a particular network, it makes it a lot harder for people to break into. Technical controls, things like network access, encryption protocols, VPNs. Identity management, how we authenticate, how we authorize, and how we get people onto all of these things, and single sign-on technologies. Understand access control modules, radius, IDS, etc. So as I said, all of this will have reading. So as we're going, please put up some questions on this area, and I will make sure that I can go over some of that as well. Yeah, so in regards to roles, let's not forget to mention third-party allowed groups, and yes, all this stuff will be in the reading material. And in just a moment, we will have a part 2. So I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes as I go over some of the other roles bits to any questions that are here before we jump into software development, security, and continue. So if you quickly want to run out there and grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee or whatever else, please do before we continue. So what is the difference between data espionage and data hiding? Okay, data espionage is stealing data, whereas data hiding is literally putting something away so it can't be seen. So covert channels and whatever else, getting information and putting it away so that people can't access it, or even using it for your own types of things. Espionage, on the other hand, is actually taking information, so theft of information. Now, theft of information is not cyber war, as people keep trying to tell you. Theft of information is done so that people can benefit, whether it's economically or whatever else, and know something. It's spying in a way, and there are plenty of corporate spies. So, let's see, are we going to go over examples and details or just definitions straightforward? There will be a lot more detail in material I'm loading, and by tomorrow morning you'll find a whole lot of reading for the weekend just to keep you busy. There is a test at the end of this, not actually a thesis per se, although we do make you do assignments and everything at the university. Where do I recommend access control? All over the place. In routers, in firewalls, or in IPS. All of the above, but it depends on your network and what you need to do. So that's a hard one to answer. So an example of a network-based access control would be a firewall, router filters, any of those. So Sean Harris' book is a good one to have a good read through. It's a bit less dry than the ISC Squared official one, although the ISC Squared official one probably has more information in it. So both are quite good. On top of that, even if you don't have the books, I'll make sure that all the reading that you'll have up there in the MOOC will be covering everything you need to know by the end of this course. So we will also, so yes, there are many, many pages in both of these books. There's a lot of reading. That's one thing you're going to learn. So there are no programming or shell assignments. The ISC Squared stuff is high level. It's more management, understanding of security. So if you have a look at the ISC Squared site, the best place there is to get all that info, and also go onto the learning portal. So if you haven't already, the MOOC, it will be a good place to ask these questions, because that's where we can make sure that we get everything there. So in lieu of insider threat, man in the middle are like next best thing. Well, yes and no. There are man in the middle attacks to worry about, of course, but it depends on what you're talking about. Man in the middle, or even injected traffic from people with malware and whatever else, are a big issue, and they're becoming a bigger issue. But insiders are still always going to be a problem, because they are inside your organization. They can easily plug something in. They can do many things far easier than any attacker will. So have a look on the learning portals to see the documents. Make sure that you read through, and it should be in your registration email. If you haven't already logged into there, then have a good look. All right, so on top of that, understanding this, ISC will give you more detail. Sean Harris is not bad. It's a better read. We will be going into many, many reading areas. At the end of this, there'll be so much reading, it's not funny. So, all right, let's get back to things. That's time, and that's our break. So, Part 2, Software Development Security. This is those controls you need to make sure that you develop applications correctly. Everything from SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle, Application Environment Controls, Effectiveness, etc., etc. So, first of all, good little reference once again. Wikipedia for this sort of stuff actually has some good ones. As much as I quite often call it the golden book of the internet, it does have a massive amount of good information. I just wouldn't use it for writing a thesis. Two different things, and using what you have for the right thing is what you need to do. So application development security, we're talking about developing software. So programming concepts, audit assurance mechanisms, malware, all that bad software that's out there, the naughty stuff that we need to get rid of, all of that. Database, data warehousing, web application environments. And we're going to look at software engineering, threats, countermeasures, database systems, and web application security, none of which is going to be in massive, massive detail, of course, although more and more will be coming, and over the next year we will see many different links of all of these things. Okay, application development programming concepts. Well, what we want to try and do is write things correctly in the first place. If we don't have as many holes in our software, then we're going to do much better. And this is where people like Microsoft have actually learnt. At the end of the day, they used to do things really, really badly. And I mean really badly. At the end of the day, everyone who remembers the old days in Microsoft and how many different vulnerabilities had come out a day must remember back Windows 98 how terrible it was. Now things are actually much better. Although there's still vulnerabilities, it's also because there is so much more code. There are hundreds of millions of lines of code now in any operating system from Microsoft, so it becomes difficult to write something perfectly. But at the same time, the number of vulnerabilities we get isn't that great. I know some people will go up in arms at that, but it's not. And with firewalls and other controls put in place correctly, we can actually have something like that done well. So Microsoft have done it by spending time and effort developing secure coding platforms. It's not perfect. Nothing ever will be. So to do that, of course, we need to understand all of this. Software controls environment and different technologies. We need to understand some of the appliances, how they provide security or not. And I'm going to make myself much more of a friend of all the vendors out there by telling you appliances, firewalls, IDS, whatever else, do not provide complete security. I will call them toys for a reason, because they do less than people. People are your greatest security asset. If you actually train, make people aware, and have people trained understanding security at some basic level, they will do far, far, far more than you will ever get from any toy. So toys do not save you. Toys just help you. Toys help people. All they do is make automation of what people do. But at the end of the day, it's people. So software can be used by different users, different privileges, and we need to think about security layers. We have all the differences in how we can attack things. For instance, if we have a VPN, we're going to go straight through that firewall and go through all of that. No, you don't need to understand programming languages, but we're going to cover how they're created and done. So we have different approaches to security. We have reactive, which is the expensive and slow way that Microsoft used to do things, and proactive, where we design secure software from the beginning. Some of the bitches I have, of course, about this come into the fact that proactive isn't always announced. There are many things that Microsoft do that they don't tell anyone about. For instance, network access protection, NAP. Some really good controls that isolate and quarantine machines and even work with Linux and Macs, but they don't tell anyone that they have Mac or Linux clients. So reactive, well, we don't have these things. We wait till the problem's occurred and then we try and fix. Yeah. We have black and white list approaches. Blacklist is we have all our known bad things and block them. Whitelist, we only allow what is known to be safe, and we have to make it provably safe. The difficulty here, of course, is there is no way of really having 100% provably safe anything. At the end of the day, a whitelist is only as good as the things on that whitelist. And, well, if you think about it for a moment, there are so many different things that get compromised. CIA, FBI, CNN have all been compromised and had malware distributed from them. So, software engineering areas. You really want to know this, then SWE-BOK, the software engineering body of knowledge. Have a look at that site, computer.org, which is the Association for Computing Machinery type thing, and IEEE type thing. So computer.org is IEEE, but SWE-BOK is between those different groups, and well, it's an engineering framework, an engineering body of knowledge for programming. It covers things like requirements, design, construction, and maintenance of software, all of which should be done as project and operational phases, and if done correctly, can be maintained extremely well. You can actually have predictable software. You need to make sure that you build all the requirements in the first place. Part of the problem with security and software is we don't think about it till too late. So logging and password quality checks, we should be building those into our system. Security assurance, testing, audit, all that needs to be put in there. All of that needs to be built in. So we're going to cover things like access controls and whatever else, and I'll also have done some of that, but I'll also point out more reading on all of these things for those who are interested. Use the forums, and I will make sure that many different things are pointed out to you. My papers, other people's papers, and stuff out there on the internet, etc. So, threats, countermeasures, and controls are part of what we need to build into our software. We need to understand what our software is doing. We need to be able to model the threats, assess the threats, analyze the threats, and all of that. So we need to put these into our software. So, if we don't build it in, it doesn't exist. We need to improve all our security controls. We can't just sit there and assume that it's all going to be right. So, prevent, detect, correct. These are policy violations that we need to control. We do this using physical, admin, and technical controls. Technical also being called logical controls. So if we're going to put the correct things into our software, we need to have preventative controls. Think how many people actually use the Windows Firewall. Windows Firewall does actually work quite well. It's free, comes with Windows. How many people have IP tables enabled on their Linux machines? All right, so some of these links have obviously changed since in the last week, but if you do a quick check on SWEBOK, and I'll load it up on the forum later, I'll make sure I get the other one. Could also be that I've got a login. We will make sure that you also go through enough that even without buying the textbook, you can pass the exam. All right, admin controls, policies, procedures, etc. An example, must get approval to make a code change. Nice simple types of things. And I'm going to load bits and pieces of all of this so that you can read it. You can get practically all of the SWEBOK stuff for free. So yes, legally, etc. So all of that's up there, and even in more detail if you happen to be an IEEE member or ACM member. Physical controls. This is where we want to make sure that we have access restricted. Servers, workstations, whatever else. And physical controls are actually something that is difficult to protect if we allow people up to our machines. I will tell you now, any single machine that you have out there where you have physical access to is vulnerable, no matter what you do. You put physical controls around it, you can lock things down a little bit. This is actually part of why I like cloud-based systems. In remote access to these things in a cloud, we can at least lock people away from having physical access. So, policies for information security to practice and lifecycle models of software. Yes, there are, and we'll make sure that there's some of those for you to read. Logical controls protect data, confidentiality, integrity, and resources availability. Includes database controls, things like accounts, roles, transactions, and also file system controls with permissions. Risk analysis, what we're trying to do is find whether the risk that we're actually facing, what we're actually having to do, is adequately protected. It's a cost-risk thing. It is economics. We cannot build a perfectly secure system. CISSP does not go into the fine points. It's a security versus functionality thing, and there are many different ways to cover risk analysis, all of which I'm going to have reading up there tonight for you for. So if you have a look in the MOOC, there's lots and lots of reading in all of this. As I said, you can either get the textbooks, or there'll be many, many things for you to read that I'm putting about it. So what about physically disabling USBs, CD-ROMs, etc.? Well, forget it. It makes things easy enough to get, for low-end users to be stopped on, but the reality is there's no perfect way of stopping physical access. Locking down USBs helps. Removing CD-ROMs helps. Having alerts when machines get rebooted, or covers get opened, or cases get opened, or whatever else helps. But the reality is there is no perfect way to stop things. At the end of the day, even with data diodes where you have SIPR, NIPR network type scenarios, high and low security things in Department of Defense, you can still get things from one area to the other. So physical controls matter. This is why, as I said, I like cloud, because at least you can lock people away from it. Threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks. Vulnerabilities and software development cycle. We need to understand a little bit about object-oriented programming. You don't need to know how to program, but you need to know what the different terms are. And the other bit to know is the capability maturity model. We'll also cover reading on malware definitions and detecting attacks. So one of the things I like to work on is expert systems and artificial intelligence, and yeah, it's where a lot of my research has gone. So SDLC. This is a project-based approach. There are many different ways of doing software development, including waterfall method, agile, etc., which we're not going to go into all the details of right now, but once again, reading. So in the SDLC, the basic way of doing it, it's a fairly much linear project model. Start with feasibility study, we scope it out, we get our requirements, then we design our software, implement it, integrate, test, and go into operations and maintenance. It's fairly straightforward. The reality is that doesn't work too well in most real organizations, and we jump back and forwards between all of that. And some of the newer ones with different organizations, it becomes even more complex. Just to make life a little bit difficult, we end up jumping back and forwards all over the place for the simple fact that that's how we have to do things. We haven't actually known everything that may change on our system over time, and we have to be prepared for it. So vulnerability. This is an instance of an error in the specification, development, or configuration of the software such that its execution can violate the security policy. That's all we're talking about with a vulnerability. Vulnerability is something where, well, a flaw is able to be exploited. So we have something in our policy, we haven't put in input validation or something like this. We haven't set up things correctly. We haven't done things right. There's a wrong problem type thing in our system, and someone can get around it. We've not programmed our system all that well. Whatever, doesn't really matter. Whatever our vulnerability is, whatever our flaw is, a vulnerability is something that our threat actor can go and exploit. They can get into our system because of it. A vulnerability is some way that a risk can actually be, well, made to occur. And so we have different classes of vulnerabilities. Like everything else, everything's classified. So we have sets of vulnerabilities. You hear about malware, cross-site scripting, and we're going to talk about a few of these and give you some more reading. We have format string vulnerabilities. So we may even use buffer overflows or whatever else as the name of a technology rather than the type of attack. And to get around this, one of the first things we need to really do is prevent bugs. Secure coding is good. So set of processes and techniques, how we test and ensure that we're doing things right. We're not going to be perfect. No one ever finds all the different problems in any piece of software that we're going to release. They're too complex these days. If you're talking about something with 100 million lines of code, we're talking about something that is bigger than like 1,000 phone books stuffed together, then you're not going to find everything as a problem. We need to make sure that the input is validated. We don't want all these funky characters that drop databases going into our networks. We want to ensure that we, well, know what we're putting in there, that we code that in, and our people who are coders need to be trained. This is where we have things like Fortified and Mandiant and whatever else with the code checkers that go out there and check whether we have done silly mistakes in things. So we have code integrity with both formal methods and the other. So we've had mentioned OASP, and that's one of the sites I will be pointing you to. OASP and Open Web Application Security there is probably the best web application security site. It is something you should have a look at and know. The top 10 vulnerabilities are the ones that cause 95% of the problems on the internet now. If we could do these common problems, then we would not, well, we'd solve 95% of the internet problems day one. Make it less economically viable for people to attack your system. We would cure so many problems on the internet just by following OASP. It is not funny. So let's see, secure programming principles, least privilege. CWE, yes, is good as well. So, least privilege, make sure that we don't give people more than they need. Don't run things as administrator if you don't need to. Economy of mechanism. Once again, don't go out there and add everything you can think of just for the sake of it. Complete mediation. Fix the whole problem. Open design. No secret source. Okay, one of the big problems with encryption and other such things is people think they can hide it. You can't. The only way crypto and other things like security controls work is to have them open. People have to be able to check them. Anyone tells you they've got a secret source that no one else can view, stay away. Separation of privilege, keep people able to do one thing but not everything, etc. And one of the big ones here comes back to human, psychological acceptability. So build it so that people want to actually not bypass all the controls. Fail-safe defaults, deny by default, whitelist, etc. Object-oriented programming is a term you need to understand. So what we're trying to do is encapsulate things in an object. In being able to reuse things and write once and use many, many times, we actually make it less likely we're going to have errors. Think about DLLs. If you have DLLs, which are dynamic link libraries, or the equivalent in Mac or whatever else, then you're going to be much better off. OOP, object, well, using an object allows you to simply reuse things. So, terms you need to read up on: instance, inheritance, and polymorphism. These are, well, fairly common things within coding, and I'm not going to go into them too much right at the moment. They're really just reading and understanding the terms. So software development processes, this is the capability maturity model. IEEE, Institute of Electronics and Electrical Engineers, is all about trying to get some proper engineering into software design and development, taking it from an art into a science. And that means taking it from the ad hoc, the heroics that we see out there and hear about all the time, the late night coders with pizza, up to the optimized. We want to move from an artisan approach to an engineering science where we can do this again and again and again and know the quality that we're going to have. Attack code. These are all those malicious things that you have. This is not only worms or viruses, but everything. It's exploits that you find being pushed against websites. It is backdoors, Trojans, and all the rest. And you need to understand the differences between different types of bad code. So attack code, parasitic code, things that are attached, or viruses or whatever else, backdoors, how you can get into systems remotely, because once you break into a system, you want to keep access and you want to keep being able to get in there if you're the bad guy. Trojan, code that is executed by a deceiving user. So it's like the old Trojan horse. Sometimes mild pranks. I remember at a SAN I forget which SAN thing, GSEC or something like that. There was one of the Phoebes there, FBI guy, and everyone kept picking on him. This is like 2004 or 5 over in the US, and they kept infecting his machine with Sub-Zero, Sub-7 or whatever it is, and had one of the Trojan sort of things where they had a bit of fun because it allowed you to flip the screen, and they had this guy with his monitor upside down. Okay, self-propagating code is one of the ones that we get to hear about, which is viruses and worms. Worms are the ones that spread all on their own, duplicating code to systems and respawning. They are worse now because they're slower. So the old way of doing it took out networks, but the reality was it didn't cause too many problems. Because it happened so fast, the old I love you and whatever else caused denial of service type attacks, but, well, we detected them quickly. Now, on the other hand, things pop round our network far, far too quickly. We have spyware. Some people actually install this stuff themselves. Not only do we have these silly toolbar type things that are going to pop out there and cause us all sorts of problems. But we have people trying to put these on to spy on their spouses or whatever else and cause all sorts of huge problems. This is things reporting back to somewhere else, like keyloggers or whatever else, that captures information. Rootkits. Once you've broken into a system, you want to maintain access. A rootkit hides the attack, hides what has occurred, and allows the attacker to maintain access. And then all together we get organized networks of these, botnets, networks of robots, zombies, where they have commands from many sources, allowing them to do denial of service, Bitcoin mining, all sorts of fun things. Quite often home networks, small business networks, etc. So once again, IDS. We should know the difference between an IDS and an IPS already from the first bit. IDS, intrusion detection, IPS, intrusion prevention. The difference is IDS will have far, far more signatures. IPS, on the other hand, well, nowhere near as many because it's stopping access. And false positives. If you stop all of this, then, well, you have people complaining. We have to know the difference between signature and anomaly detection. Anomaly is strange stuff, anything that's a bit funky out there. Signature is like you have a virus signature, something that is known. We've seen a bad thing happen before, we will monitor that bad thing. We have integrity controls, such as tripwire, AIDS, or other such things, where we look at the hash. What we do is take a computer hash and see if the file has changed. If a single bit in a file changes, we know that it's different. So over time, we can protect and defend our system. We also need to know database security. Web 2.0, 3.0, and the world as it's coming along is all about database security. So database access controls are important because web front end with all of these things is how we are storing information. We need to make sure that we have access control mechanisms like we discussed in the first part, maintenance of integrity, and attack and countermeasure type controls. So, yes, questions can be talked about later as well, and we'll cover more of this on the forum. So please make sure that you ask questions on the forum as well, and we will cover much on that, and you'll keep me busy over the next few weeks answering all this stuff as well as all the other people from Charles Sturt. So, relational databases, rows, tables, primary keys. Think about a whole lot of linked Excel spreadsheets. Access databases with Windows being one of the smaller ways, right up to Oracle and MySQL and all that sort of fun stuff. And we're going away from that into non-relational things like NoSQL and Hadoop, but that's a different issue. So database access controls are done by views, where we only look at what we're allowed to see. Stored procedure, code executed on the database itself, and roles, where we assign permissions to only certain access. Countermeasure, parameterized queries. Read this. SQL injection is one of the OWASP top 10 always. I want you to have a good search on parameterized queries, and I'll be loading some stuff on it as well. If everyone out there actually did coding correctly, if we did all our stuff correctly, not just looking for bad characters and all that sort of stuff, but we did parameterized queries, then 98% of all these problems we get with SQL injection would go away. Wouldn't be 100% still, but most of it goes away. What we're doing is we're separating data and commands. No confusion. The computer knows which is which. So, web issues. One of the big things we're going to have to remember is everything becomes web. Remember that. The world is becoming web-based. So we need to think about all the different types of attacks, browser attacks, cross-site forgery request, and cross-site scripting. Cross-site forgery request is not the same as cross-site scripting. They are different. So we need to think about server controls. Server-side will do things like strong input validation. Whitelist approach generally means we allow certain things and reject everything else. And it's extremely important to have server-side controls. If we leave it at the browser, some smartass like myself is going to run up Paris Proxy or one of the other tools you can get from OWASP and intercept everything before it leaves my browser and change everything that you're using as a control. I guarantee if you're putting your controls on my browser, I don't suffer from your controls. That simple. My browser I'll change what the hell I use. And if you don't like it, too bad, because I'm one of these naughty people who, my browser, my machine, ha. So you want to control things, you have to do it at your server. Ideally, depth. We want defense in depth. The moat, the tower, the whole lot. So you want to do it server side, you protect your own server, you do it right, you have all these controls, and you put it on the client. But you don't only have it on the client. You put it on the server first. You make sure it does its controls. And then we can have some level of protection. So, cross-site request forgery. We need to have a secret value for each and every session. The problem here, when we're talking about cross-site request forgery, is people being able to jump from tab to tab and all of these things. So, session fixation. We have the HTTP session fixation attack. We don't have a long enough session ID. We have a session ID that's trapped. Someone clicks on it. Web accepts it as a valid thing. Have an authentication. Authenticated. Username already there. We can send commands as someone else. All of this is done because of bad programming. OWASP. And I'll make sure I point this out where you need to go. OWASP, you're going to find out all the answers to these things. It's well and truly known. These things have been fixed for a decade, yet we still see them. Why? Because we don't choose session IDs well. We don't have our programmers know what they need to include. They don't think about the controls on places like OWASP, and they do the same dumb things again and again. Okay? Attacker needs a valid session ID, not hard to get. But once they get it, they can keep it alive. We need to program things right. Why? Because we haven't taught our people correctly. Why? Because we haven't put controls in place, those soft ones that say, if you're going to write software, you have to write good software. That sort of stuff. We haven't come back and put the risk against the people who do these things well, and we keep going, oh, well, they're being hacked. So what? Well, no, it's about time we know about things like OWASP and we actually follow through. There are all these good tools out there, free. So, shared knowledge, like a man-in-the-middle attack. So, one thing we can do, authentication nonce. So I'll leave you to read up on that one. I'll be putting links up to OWASP and all this stuff so you can see how easy it is to actually fix. Some more reading. GIAC, GIAC.org, resources, application security have some good links and papers. People like me keep pumping the things out for a while. Code injection attacks. So we have HTTP response splitting so we can get around some of the controls on web application firewalls, WAFs, cross-site scripting, cross-site forgery request, and other code injection attacks. Code injection attacks are where we're going to be thinking about how we break into servers. Cross-site scripting, XSS, tricks people into allowing their browser to execute code. Targets the browser, the user, fools people. You send things in email, you send things in blogs, whatever else. It's not attacking the server, it's attacking trust. And many of these parts in security are about trust. And there are many simple things you can do. VPNs, scanning, phishing, port scan, all of that. You want to do a simple check, script, alert, XSS script, that's it. Have a look at hackers.org. They say many different checks you can do. All obscured ones you can get around all this stuff with. Types are reflection and persistent. So reflection's the easiest to test. You place something in a URL and see if it pops something up. Persistent, you have to input script and then view a resulting page. Reflection attack, just add script alert into your URL. That simple. Persistent attack, well, go into a guest book, classified ad, social networking, Facebook, that sort of thing, and go into there. Cross-site forgery request is not related to cross-site scripting. And it can make it worse. Didn't see that? Anyway, you don't inject code. It leverages web server trust. Many of these things are all about breaking trust. So Here's from SANS.org, the step through, what you need to do. So I'm not going to actually walk through all these things because we're short on time, but OWASP is your friend, OWASP. Response splitting, what you need to do is all there described. SQL injection is there described. How to, and there are some good cheat sheets on all these things, some good walkthroughs, injection attacks by examples. Start practicing. Okay, at the end of the day, Quizlet, and this is one example. We're going to start you putting up flashcards. Start doing the flashcards. Start testing yourself again and again and again, because by the end of this 5 weeks, we're going to have you know all this stuff. Okay, so if you look at the MOOC tonight, or for some of you in the morning, whatever else, in the next few hours, there's going to be a whole lot of material loaded for you to start reading. On top of that, I want you to go and have a good look through the OWASP stuff. Okay, OWASP.org. Have a great look, read, and learn. And, well, that's really it. So any of the others want to take over for the moment and have a goodbye or not? Or let's put that in the chat session for all. Let's bring that up here. Here we go. Load away. Or not. Or not. Ah, gotta love live things. I think Chrome needs to restart. Let's try. OWASP on the other. Waiting. For some reason, taking forever and a day. Anyway, at the end of it all, that is fairly much it for now. We will eventually go from there. That's the site. Why it's taking so long, I have no idea. Obviously, I'm connected to other things, but hey, that's life. Sometimes these things take forever. I think I need to restart Chrome. One of the fun things of GoToWebinar, it chews up memory like nothing on earth. I've got a 16 gig laptop here, and my memory goes from 4 gig in use to 15 gig in use by the end of any of these sessions. Can we say bad memory management from GoTo? Okay, so here is welcome to OWASP, the free, open security community for web, etc. Great stuff on this site. Have a look at it. Wholeheartedly recommend it. Okay, you want to learn all about security on web, then this is it. How you break into things, how you protect things, the whole lot's there. Okay, so basically that's what we're learning for the day. So I hope you've enjoyed your first section. I hope it's all been good. As I said, there will be much more, and we will be going over all of this in more detail. And yes, fire hose approach, and yeah, we could have DOSed the site. That might be it. Pointing all these people to it at once could be the because everything else seems to be happening. So anyway, I'm back to get a whole lot more coffee to keep myself hyped up for the next session. Caffeine is your friend. Never forget that one. Okay, and we are going to make sure you pass. You can download the recording. We are going to give you reading. If you put in the effort, I'm going to make sure that by the end of this, you pass this course. Okay? All right, next session is a repeat of this session. Yes, next week is a totally different one. We will go through all of this stuff, give you reading and all of the rest. If you keep doing the reading, you keep asking me questions, I will keep pointing you through till you pass this course. that simple. Okay, at that, I'm going to stop the recording and go